"You're nothing without me," my son spat, then cut off my pension that same night. Not a warning, not a call, just locked me out like I was already dead. At the club, he laughed with his friends, told them I was slipping, said I was confused. I'd built his entire firm with my hands, and now he was erasing me, paycheck by paycheck, reputation by reputation. But he forgot one thing. His boss? The man who stood in that doorway and heard everything. I taught him to frame his first damn house, and he remembered. What came next wasn't rage, it was timing, strategic, quiet, and devastating. My name is Walter Ellison, and I'm 75 years old. Every morning I'm in my workshop by 6, breathing in cedar and fresh ground coffee while checking my tools. My late wife Marie made me promise to guide our only son David toward success, so I handed him my contracting, business, clients, contacts, everything I'd built over 50 years. These days David dismisses my outdated methods at every turn, his jaw tightening whenever I mention how we earned our reputation. What he doesn't realize is that Jim Morton, his company's executive director, still remembers who first taught him about load-bearing walls 30 years ago. I've watched David interrupt me at meetings, seen him flinch when old clients ask about my techniques. My calloused hands still know every detail of proper joinery, but let me start from the beginning. Early spring sunshine warmed my shoulders as I walked into the copy shop, nodding at Sally behind the counter. "Need these blueprints crystal clear," I told her, smoothing out the renovation plans from Tom Peterson, one of my oldest clients. "Could you do them justice? For you, Mr. Ellison?" "Always." She handled the drawings like they were made of gold leaf. While the machine hummed, I thought about Tom's whispered hint at the hardware store last week. This little remodel could turn into something bigger, maybe 7 figures bigger. He'd winked, knowing I'd passed the opportunity to David. That's what fathers do, right? We step aside, let our children shine. The fresh prints smelled like opportunity, clean lines showing the bones of what could be. I rolled them carefully, securing them with a red ribbon the way I always had. Some habits die hard, you know? The elevator ride to David's 14th floor office felt longer than usual. I'd rehearsed my pitch. Tom Peterson's looking to expand. These plans are just the beginning. Simple, direct. The way I'd taught David to present to clients back when he was learning the ropes. Have you ever noticed how different modern offices feel compared to workshops? All that, glass and chrome, not a speck of sawdust in sight. The reception area of Cornerstone Development gleamed like a showroom. Catching my reflection in the wall, I straightened my collar. My hair had gone fully grey, but my shoulders were still square. 50 years of honest work will do that. "Good morning," I said to the receptionist, Jenny, if I remembered right. "Walter Ellison to see David. Just need a minute of his time." She smiled. Probably remembering when this was my office before I signed it all over. "Of course, Mr. Ellison, let me page him." While I waited, I studied the framed article on the wall. Cornerstone Development, building on a legacy of excellence. The word legacy caught in my throat. That was my legacy they were talking about. Every nail, every handshake, every satisfied client. The sound of David's door opening pulled me back to the present. There he stood in his tailored suit, that practiced corporate smile plastered across his face. For a moment, I saw echoes of the boy who used to beg to hold my level, who'd beam with pride when I let him measure twice. "Dad?" His voice carried across the reception area. "What are you doing here?" I lifted the blueprints, my offering of future success. "Got something you'll want to see, son. Tom Peterson." The change in his expression hit me like a physical blow. His eyes hardened, smile vanishing as if it had never existed. The temperature in that glossy office seemed to drop 10 degrees. You know that moment when you realize you've misread everything? When the ground shifts under your feet? I stood there, blueprints half raised, watching my son's face turn to stone. "I'm in the middle of something," he said, each word sharp as broken glass. "You should have called first." The red ribbon suddenly felt like it was burning my fingers. I heard Jenny's sharp intake of breath behind her desk, saw her quickly look down at her computer screen. "This is important, David. Tom's talking about—" "Everything's important with you, isn't it?" He glanced at his watch, making sure I saw the gesture. "Some of us have actual meetings to prepare for." My grip tightened on those blueprints, knuckles whitening against the crisp paper. The coffee I'd had earlier turned sour in my stomach. This wasn't the boy I'd raised, standing before me in Italian leather shoes and cold disdain. This was someone else entirely. I followed David into his office, trying to ignore how he didn't hold the door for me. Remember when I taught him that gesture? Always hold the door, son, shows respect. Funny how lessons fade. The place hadn't changed much since I'd handed over the keys. Same view of the harbor, same built-in cabinets I'd installed myself one weekend. But now there were awards I didn't recognize and photos I wasn't in. Here, I said, unrolling the blueprints across his polished desk. My weathered hands looked out of place against the mahogany. Tom Peterson. You remember him? That mansion renovation on Highland Drive back in 19. He's looking to convert his lake property. Guest house, boat dock, the works. David flicked a pen between his fingers, the gold clip catching the morning light. And he's hinting at 7 figures, David. Full renovation, top to bottom. The kind of project that opens doors. I traced the foundation lines with my finger. See here? He wants local timber, hand-finished. Says he remembers how we did his study. Nostalgic, David said, dragging the word out like it was something distasteful. He leaned back in his chair, one of those ergonomic things that probably cost more than my first truck, and let out an exaggerated sigh. Very traditional. You ever have a moment when your chest gets tight, but you push through anyway? Look at the scope here, I continued, pointing to the detailed measurements. Tom's particular about his numbers, always has been. If you could spare 5 minutes, I'd like to talk to Marcus about the budget estimates, just to make sure we're all... Marcus? David's chair snapped forward. The CEO Marcus, known him 30 years back when he was just starting in permits. He'd appreciate the accuracy coming from... No. David stood up, smooth as silk. He gestured toward a side corridor. Wait in there. Modern firms avoid sentimental optics. The word sentimental hit like a slap. My jaw clenched so tight I could hear my teeth creak. Sentimental. Son, I built this company's reputation on outdated handshakes and folksy wisdom. His smirk turned cruel. Wake up, Dad, you're nothing without me. The words echoed in that fancy office, bouncing off the glass and steel like bullets. My hands, those same hands that had taught him to hold a hammer, started to shake. Have you ever felt the ground disappear beneath your feet? That's what it was like, standing there in front of my own flesh and blood, being told I was nothing. Then came the click. A door behind. David's desk opened, and there stood Marcus Anderson, CEO of the parent company, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. His gaze moved from David to me, then to the blueprints on the desk. The silence in that room grew so thick, you could have cut it with a saw. The world tilted sideways. My coffee from earlier churned in my stomach as Marcus surveyed the scene, his expression unreadable. David's face had gone pale, that smirk vanishing faster than morning. Too. You know those moments that change everything, when the air itself seems to pause, waiting. That's what it felt like as Marcus stood in that doorway, his eyes narrowed, having heard God knows how much. David's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blueprint corner curled up in the air conditioning, and I watched it move, unable to look at my son's face. The harbor stretched out beyond the windows, boats moving silent as ghosts, while, inside that office, 3 generations of business history hung suspended in one terrible moment. Marcus's hand still rested on the doorknob, his signet ring catching the light just like David's pen had moments before. But where David's gesture had been dismissive, Marcus's stillness felt like judgment itself. I've never been one for shouting matches. My father taught me that a man's dignity lives in the spaces between his words, in what he chooses not to say. So I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and did what I'd always done. Found the practical path forward. Could we grab a coffee, son? I kept my voice steady, though my hands still trembled from his earlier words. Just 15 minutes to talk things through. David glanced at Marcus, who hadn't moved from the doorway. I have meetings. I'll wait. I gathered up the blueprints, rolling them carefully. Remember how I used to help him with his math homework at the kitchen table. Hours spent breaking down fractions while his mother's wind chimes tinkled outside. Funny how memories ambush you at the worst moments. Marcus cleared his throat. Take the time, David. Then he was gone, pulling the door shut behind him with a quiet click. The cafe downstairs was all chrome and glass, nothing like the diner where I'd taught David to read contracts over burnt coffee and apple pie. I settled into one of those uncomfortable modern chairs and laid out my thoughts as clearly as the blueprints I'd brought earlier. I'll step back completely, I said, watching him scroll through his phone. Write up a retirement announcement that puts you in the best light. Something about passing the torch to the next generation, modernizing the business. Whatever helps your image with the board. The espresso machine behind the counter hissed and sputtered. David didn't look up. You can have my remaining clients, my vendor connections, everything. Clean break, no strings. I pushed my untouched coffee aside. Just let me bow out with some dignity. Handled, he said to his phone screen, nodding at whatever message had caught his attention. That all? The drive home felt longer than usual. You know those moments when your mind keeps circling back to one thing, trying to make sense of it? That was me replaying his dismissive handled, while muscle memory guided my truck through familiar streets. Back home, I decided to get ahead of some bills. My pension wasn't much, but it covered utilities and kept me independent. I'd always been careful with money. Had to be, raising a boy alone. The banking app on my phone had given me trouble before, so I wasn't too worried when it rejected my password. I tried again. No luck. Reset the password following every step. Still locked out. Customer service, this is Rachel. How can I help you today? I explained the situation, gave her my information. Could hear her typing in the background. I see here your account access was modified yesterday by authorized management, she said. They have full permissions for any changes. My coffee mug slipped from my grip, hitting the kitchen floor with a crack that echoed through the empty house. Who exactly authorized this change? I'm sorry, sir, but I can only discuss that with the listed account manager. Her voice was kind, probably thinking I was just another confused old-timer. Would you like me to transfer you to them? No need. I knew exactly who'd done this. The same person who'd called me nothing just hours ago. The kettle on the stove started to whistle, a thin, high sound that grew louder and louder until it was screaming through the kitchen. I stared at my dark phone screen, seeing my reflection distorted in the glass. Grey hair, lines around my eyes, a lifetime of work written across my face. The pension wasn't much, but it was mine. I'd earned every penny of it, same as I'd earned every callus on my hands and every client's trust in my word. You ever notice how betrayal has a way of clearing your mind? Like a sharp winter wind that strips everything down to bare branches. I let the kettle scream while I walked to my office. The printer hummed to life as I pulled up months of account statements. Proof, in black and white, of what was mine. Come morning, I'd have some questions for my son about authorized management. The papers were still warm from the printer when I stacked them neatly in my folder. Outside, the October wind rattled the workshop door, the same door I'd helped David hang when he was 12, teaching him about level lines and true corners. I'd never been one for fancy clubs, but David had insisted I take a membership when he made partner. It's about appearances, he'd said. Now, walking through those polished doors, I understood exactly what kind of appearances he meant to maintain. The main room glowed with brass fixtures and old money. David sat at the center of a round table, holding court with 3 other men in suits worth more than my truck. Their laughter rolled across the room like thunder. Dad? He didn't stand when he saw me approach. What brings you here? I kept my voice steady, gripping the folder of account statements. We need to discuss the pension account and some other matters. Oh, right. He turned to his companions with an exaggerated wink. Dad's been a bit confused lately. Forgets things, you know how it is. The men chuckled on cue. My fingers tightened on the folder's edge. The bank statements are quite clear, I said. Nothing confused about unauthorized changes. See what I mean? David's voice carried across the room. 1 minute it's account access, next he's telling stories about jobs from 30 years ago, getting harder to know what's real and what's nostalgia. More laughter. A waiter glided past with fresh drinks, and I caught my reflection in his silver tray, straight-backed, weathered, out of place among all this mahogany and brass. You know that feeling when you're standing perfectly still, but the ground's shifting under your feet? That's how it felt, watching these strangers nod along with my son's performance. Near the billiards table, 2 club members I'd known for years bent their heads together. Poor Walter, one murmured. David says he's been slipping. The words followed me down the long hallway, past rows of plaques celebrating member achievements. Each step felt like sandpaper against raw skin. My own name was on one of those plaques. Contractor of the Year, 1992. David had been so proud that day, helping me hang it in my office. I found a quiet corner table and pulled out my phone. Time to face facts and figure out how long my savings would last. The numbers didn't look good. Without the pension, I was burning through cash faster than winter burns through firewood. That's when the email from First Regional Bank arrived. Subject line, notice, balloon payment due, 90 days. The room tilted sideways for a moment. I'd refinanced the house 3 years ago when David needed capital for the firm's expansion. He'd promised to handle the payments, said it was the least he could do. Just a formality, he'd called it. Sliding the papers across his desk. My chest squeezed tight as I read the amount due. 3 months, 90 days, 2,160 hours of watching my world shrink down to nothing. You ever notice how time changes when you're cornered? It becomes this living thing breathing down your neck, counting out heartbeats like coins. From across the room, I heard David order another round. "Put it on my tab." His voice carried that artificial warmth he used with clients, the one that never quite reached his eyes. I folded my phone away and tucked it in my pocket, right next to my crumpled pride. The budget could wait until morning. I'd need a clear head to figure out how to stretch dollars thinner than construction paper. Standing up, I straightened my jacket. It was a good jacket, worn at the elbows but still presentable. Like me, I suppose. David's laughter chased me toward the door, and I remembered teaching him to sandwood with the grain, to always follow the natural lines. Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten that lesson, or maybe he'd chosen to ignore it. The night air hit my face like a wake-up call. My truck waited in the parking lot, looking solid and honest among all the gleaming luxury cars. I'd taught David to drive in that truck, back when he still believed in working with his hands. The next morning, I was up before the sun, sitting at my kitchen table with nothing but a weak desk lamp and hard numbers for company. Ever notice how problems that seem manageable in daylight grow teeth in those grey hours before dawn? I dug out my old leather-bound ledger, the same one I'd used to track every nail and board since '82. My writing wasn't as steady as it used to be, but the columns still lined up straight. Had to mean something, right? The utility. Bill sat on top of the pile. I remembered telling David about the winter of '89, when work dried up and I'd kept our little house warm by burning scrap wood in the fireplace. He'd been about 10 then, making shadow puppets on the wall while I explained how you weather lean times. Funny how those lessons slip away once someone starts wearing Italian shoes. "Let's see what we're working with," I muttered, clicking my pen. The sound echoed in the empty kitchen. Electric $140, water, $78 gas, $95 phone, basic plan only, $45 internet, cancel food, $300, cut to $200. Medications. My hand paused there. The heart pills weren't optional, and the copays kept climbing. I wrote down $175 and drew a hard line under it. The numbers crawled across the page like ants, each one taking another bite out of my savings. By the time I reached day 60, the math stopped making sense. My hands weren't quite steady as I calculated the cascade of late fees that would hit when the mortgage payment bounced. You know what's worse than seeing your future vanish? Watching it disappear in precise dollar amounts. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling where hairline cracks spread like a roadmap to nowhere. Maybe David was right. Maybe I was finished. The thought sat in my chest like cold lead. The shop was still dark when I unlocked it an hour later. Didn't bother with lights. I knew every inch by heart. My fingers found the workbench, tracing decades of scars in the wood. Each groove had a story. That notch from David's first birdhouse, that burn mark from teaching him to solder copper pipe. The tools hung on their pegs like old friends. Good brands, well maintained, might fetch enough to buy me another month or two if I sold them all. The thought made my stomach turn. I picked up a level, the one I'd used to teach David about true lines and plumb walls. Everything starts square, I told him, or nothing ends up right. My phone buzzed in my pocket, display showing an unknown number, probably another collector. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. Walter Ellison. Walter. The voice was familiar, carrying the kind of authority that comes from corner offices. "This is James Morton." My grip tightened. On the workbench. David's boss. The man who'd stood in that doorway watching my son try to hide me like a shameful secret. "I've known your work longer than I've known your son," he continued, "and I believe we need to have a conversation." The old wood felt solid under my palm, anchoring me as the shop seemed to tilt. "There's a diner on Oak Street," he said. "Murphy's. Could you meet me there at 11? Somewhere quiet, away from the office." I thought about declining, about preserving what little dignity I had left. But pride doesn't keep the lights on. "I'll be there," I whispered, and the words felt like admitting defeat and grabbing a lifeline all at once. The phone went dark in my hand. I slipped it back into my pocket, fingers brushing against the folded ledger. Through the dusty windows, dawn was finally breaking. That cold, clear light that either promises a fresh start or exposes every flaw depending on how you look at it. I pulled into Murphy's parking lot at 10:50 sharp. Old habits die hard. You don't spend 40 years meeting clients without learning to pad your arrival time. The diner hadn't changed since the 80s. Same neon sign buzzing above the door. Same smell of coffee and bacon grease when you walked in. Remember those days when every job started with a diner meet? You'd spread blueprints between the sugar shakers while truckers drank their coffee 2 booths over. Simpler times, when a handshake meant something. I chose a booth near the back, positioning myself so I could watch the door. The vinyl seat crackled under me, patched with duct tape in one corner. A waitress appeared, couldn't have been more than 20, and set down a mug without asking. "Coffee's fresh," she said, already turning away. "Menu's under the napkin. Holder if you need it." I pulled out the laminated menu more for something to do with my hands than any real interest in eating. My reflection ghosted in the window glass, grey hair needing a trim, circles under my eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. When had I started looking so weathered? The bell above the door chimed at exactly 11. James Morton stepped in, briefcase in hand, looking every bit the executive in his charcoal suit. But something in his expression, a tightness around the eyes maybe, told me this wasn't a casual chat. He spotted me and walked over, each step measured like he was weighing his thoughts. "Walter," he said, sliding into the opposite bench. "Thank you for meeting me." The waitress materialized again. "Coffee," he said before she could speak. "Black." We sat in silence until she returned with his cup. Steam curled between us like question marks in the air. I waited, letting him set the pace. That's another thing you learn in construction. Sometimes the most important part of a job is knowing when to wait. "Tell me about the Harriman project," he said finally. "From 98. The warehouse conversion?" The question caught me off guard. 3-story brick building downtown, I said. "Converted it to office space. Why? And the routing number for the material deposits. You handled those personally?" My coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Always did. Every job, every time." He nodded, making a note in a small leather book. "The Davidson residence in 2002. Same thing. I signed every check, tracked every penny." The confusion must have shown on my face. "James, what's this about?" He held up a hand, his expression grave. "A few more questions first. The Westbrook Mall renovation, that would have been 2005. Did you authorize any changes to the original contract?" "No." The word came out sharp. "That job was clean start to finish. Everything went exactly as written." He made another note, then closed the book. "I do not want you blindsided, Walter." The phrase hung there like a hammer about to drop. James reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope, placing it carefully between our coffee cups. It looked innocent enough, but something in the way he handled it, like it might bite, made my stomach clench. I reached for it, but he kept one hand on the corner. "Open that at home," he said quietly. "You will need steadiness." The envelope seemed to pulse between us like something alive. I drew my hand back, nodding slowly. "Tomorrow morning," he said. 9 o'clock, same place. We'll discuss options." He stood, straightening his jacket. "And Walter, don't call anyone about this. Not yet." I sat there long after he left, staring at the envelope. The waitress refilled my coffee twice before I finally picked it up. It felt heavy for its size. The rain had started while we talked. One of those steady spring drizzles that beads on windshields and whispers against metal. I climbed into my truck and set the envelope on the passenger seat, where it seemed to watch me like an unwelcome passenger. The raindrops ticked against the roof in an unsteady rhythm. Each one felt like another second ticking away towards something I wasn't sure I wanted to face. But there it sat, that innocent-looking envelope, holding whatever truth James thought needed such careful handling. I set the envelope on my kitchen table like it might explode. The coffee maker gurgled in the background. I'd started a fresh pot the moment I got home, knowing I'd need it. You know that feeling when you're about to open something that'll change everything, like standing at the edge of a cliff in the dark. My hands weren't as steady as I'd have liked when I broke the seal. The first page slid out crisp and official, a bank statement. Nothing too shocking there until I saw the signature at the bottom. My signature. Except I hadn't signed this. The strokes were close, damn close. But the E in Ellison had that little extra curl I'd dropped years ago. Jesus, I whispered, spreading more papers across the worn tablecloth my wife had picked out decades ago. Transfer records, dozens of them, all with that almost perfect forgery. Client retainers being shuffled into some account I'd never heard of. The coffee maker beeped, but I couldn't make myself get up. Then I hit the collateral documents. My throat went dry as I read line after line of my name being offered up as guarantee on credit. I never approved. The same name I'd spent decades building into something solid, being passed around like poker chips at a late-night game. Remember that cliff I mentioned? Well, now I was falling. I barely slept that night. When my alarm went off at 7, I was already dressed and halfway through my third cup of coffee. The drive to Morton Construction's corporate office felt like it took hours and seconds all at once. James was waiting in a corner, conference room, the kind with privacy glass that goes foggy at the flip of a switch. He'd loosened his tie, and something in his posture reminded me of 30 years ago, when we were both just starting out. Back then, he'd been the eager kid, learning the ropes while I ran my first major project. "Sit down, Walt," he said quietly. Not Walter or Mr. Ellison. Walt. Like the old days. I sank into one of those expensive leather chairs. "How long have you known?" He opened his briefcase and started laying out documents. Not copies this time, originals. The IT department flagged some irregular patterns 3 months ago. Been gathering evidence since then. He tapped a stack of papers. "These are emails your son sent authorizing transfers using your credentials. Time-stamped, tracked, ironclad." My stomach lurched. "The clients?" "Don't know yet. That's part of why we're here." He leaned forward. "Our legal team's been documenting everything. Peterson in accounting helped trace the money flows. Even got our digital forensics guy involved. Turns out your son wasn't as clever with his passwords as he thought." I stared at the neat piles of evidence, each one another nail in the coffin of everything I'd built. That house I'd raised him in, the one with the mortgage balloon payment ticking down, he'd basically gambled it away without my knowledge. The shame hit me like a physical wave. All those years of teaching him to measure twice, cut once. All those lectures about integrity being a man's real legacy. Had any of it stuck? But shame wouldn't stop that 90-day clock. I forced myself to look James in the eye. "What stops this before day 90? He reached down and patted his briefcase. A small smile touched his lips. Not happy, more like grimly satisfied. "Timing and sunlight," he said. "If you can stand both." "Meaning?" "Timing. We've got board meetings coming up where certain disclosures have to be made. Sunlight. Everything comes out, Walt. Everything. No quiet settlements, no sweeping it under the rug." He paused. "Think you can handle that?" Could I handle watching my own son's fraud laid bare? Could I handle the whispers, the looks, the whole town knowing how thoroughly I'd been played by my own flesh and blood? I thought about my wife, about the promise I'd made her to look after our boy, but I also thought about her insistence on honesty above all else. She'd have been heartbroken, but she'd have wanted the truth out. "When do we start?" I asked. After James laid out the broad strokes, we got down to brass tacks. He pulled out a yellow legal pad, old school just like me, and we started mapping everything against that 90-day clock that had been haunting my nights. "Walk me through your standard filing procedure again," he said, pen hovering over the paper. The familiar routine steadied my voice. "Notarize everything, triple-check dates, submit with tracking numbers so nothing disappears." I'd learned that last part the hard way back in '82, when a crooked supplier tried claiming he never got my lien notice. James nodded, jotting notes. "Good. We'll need sworn statements from you on every unauthorized signature, every diverted payment." He drew a timeline across the page. "Board meets monthly, third Thursday. That's our framework. You ever watch dominoes fall? How one precise tap sets everything in motion. That's what we were building, a chain reaction that'd expose every lie. Their review committee requires 48 hours with any financial disclosures," James explained, marking dates. "So, we file your statements." He circled a Tuesday. "Here. That forces them to include it in the agenda." I leaned closer, squinting at his neat handwriting. What about the client accounts? Already flagged for audit. Peterson's got a complete trace on the money flows. He tapped his pen on each milestone. You'll need to verify client names, dates, amounts. Everything has to be airtight. No room for memory lapses or misunderstandings. The weight of it settled on my shoulders. I'd have to document how my own son had betrayed not just me, but every handshake deal and written contract we'd ever made. Had to wonder if he remembered that first lesson I taught him about measuring lumber, how being off by even a quarter inch could throw a whole project out of true. James must have read something in my face. You can handle this, Walt? I cleared my throat. Just help me get the sequence straight. For the next hour, we drilled down into details. James had our legal team drafting letters that would land precisely 1 hour before the final agenda deadline. Not a minute sooner. We couldn't risk giving anyone time to bury the evidence. Not a minute later, it had to be on record. I recited client names until they became a litany. Anderson Renovation, March 15th, 42,000. Baker Edition, April 3rd, 28. 5. Each one matched a transfer record. Each transfer record showed my forged signature. When we finished, the legal pad looked like a battlefield map, covered in arrows and circles and precise timing notes. James tore off the sheet and handed it to me. Keep this safe. Trust me, I said, folding it carefully. This doesn't leave my sight. Back home, I spread everything out on my kitchen table. The plan, the mortgage notice, my dwindling account statements. Took out a red pen and marked the milestones on my wall calendar. Day 60, when the first filings would hit. Day 75, board meeting and full disclosure. Day 90, when that balloon payment came due. The dates stared back at me like targets. I thought about my son sitting in his office, probably feeling untouchable behind that fancy desk. Wonder if he ever thought about the summer I taught him to frame a wall, how I'd shown him that the strength of anything we build depends on its foundation. That night, sleep came in fits and starts. Every time I dozed off, I'd jerk awake, thinking I'd missed some crucial detail. When my phone buzzed at 6 a.m. with the calendar reminder, board meeting 9 pre, I'd already been up for an hour. Standing at my closet, I pushed past the flannel shirts to the back, where I kept my one good suit, pulled out a white dress shirt. Instead, some battles call for armor, even if it's just starched cotton. I took my time ironing it, making each crease sharp enough to cut paper. Funny how familiar motions can steady your hands. The rhythm of it brought back memories of getting ready for my first big contract presentation, my wife straightening my collar, telling me to stand tall. At 8:15, I knotted my tie, grabbed my folder of documents, and headed for the door. The morning sun hit my truck's windshield, almost blinding me for a second. Time to see if all our careful planning would hold true. The lobby hadn't changed since I first walked through it 30 years ago. Same marble floors, same brass directory, same potted plants flanking the elevator. But this morning everything felt different. The security guard nodded as I signed in, probably wondering why an old contractor was wearing pressed cotton instead of flannel. You ever notice how time moves differently when you're waiting for something big? Those 20 minutes in the lobby chair felt like hours. I watched younger men in expensive suits hurry past, their shoes clicking against marble, each one carrying the kind of leather portfolio my son had started using when he decided Dad's tools weren't good enough anymore. At 8:45, James appeared at my elbow. Ready? As I'll ever be. My knees cracked as I stood. Funny how age shows up at the worst moments. The boardroom stretched out like a church, all dark wood and serious faces. I chose a seat near the back, where my son wouldn't spot me right away. He swept in 2 minutes before 9, laptop under his arm, chatting with someone about projected revenues. Didn't even glance my direction. The smell of coffee and cologne filled the air as the last executives filed in. James called the meeting to order exactly on time. That was his way. Standard reports rolled past, quarterly numbers, project updates, market forecasts. My son jumped in twice with polished comments about aggressive growth strategies. Then James cleared his throat, moving to compliance matters. The screen behind him lit up with the first document. There was my signature, or what was supposed to be my signature, on a transfer authorization. Then another, and another. The room got real quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like a held breath. These discrepancies, James continued, were flagged by our audit team. He clicked through more slides. Client retainer accounts, routing numbers, collateral agreements. Each one bore my forged signature. Remember how I said time moves strange? Well, it practically stopped when my son's face went from confident to confused to chalk white in about 3 seconds flat. A whisper started in one corner of the room and spread like smoke. This is... My son stood up, his chair rolling backward. These are simple clerical errors, administrative oversights that... Section 4.8 of Company Policy, one of the directors cut in, explicitly prohibits unauthorized account access and misuse of signatory authority. She adjusted her glasses. These are not clerical errors, Mr. Ellison. These are systematic violations. You don't understand! His voice cracked. I had permission. Dad always let me... He swung around, finally seeing me. His eyes went wild. Tell them you approved everything. I kept my hands folded in my lap, steady as a level beam. Didn't say a word. James's voice stayed professional, but I caught the steel underneath. The board has reviewed the evidence. Given the severity and scope of these violations, I recommend immediate termination, pending full investigation and potential legal action. You can't do this. My son's laugh had an edge of panic. I built this division. The Miller contract alone? All in favor? James asked. Hands rose around the table like a wave. Not one stayed down. No. My son ripped off his badge, flinging it across the polished wood. No, this is a setup, a conspiracy. He jabbed a finger at me. You bitter old man. You couldn't stand that I made something better than your little contractor business. Security appeared in the doorway. They must have been waiting just outside. My son's face twisted into something I'd never seen before, something ugly and raw. I'll burn it all down, he hissed. Everything you built, every relationship, every contract. When I'm done, your precious reputation won't be worth dirt. I looked down at my hands then, these old, calloused hands that had taught him to hold a hammer, to measure twice, to build things that would last. Took one slow breath, feeling it fill my lungs completely before letting it go. The security team stepped forward. My son grabbed his laptop, knocked over a water pitcher and stormed out. We all sat there listening to his footsteps fade. Then the distant ding of the elevator. James adjourned the meeting. As chairs scraped back and murmurs filled the room, I stayed seated, thinking about tomorrow's court filing and wondering if my son remembered the day I'd taught him about foundations, how even the finest house would fall if you built it on sand. The courthouse steps were already crowded by 8:30 the next morning. You know that heavy feeling when you're about to do something that can't be undone? That's what sat in my chest as I pushed through the brass doors. Inside, the marble floors echoed with whispers and shuffling feet. I'd only been in this building once before, to finalize my wife's estate. Funny how some memories stick to places like old wallpaper. But I didn't have time to get lost in the past. I found courtroom C and slipped into a back row bench. My son and his attorney arrived 5 minutes before 9, both in charcoal suits that probably cost more than my truck. They huddled near the defense table, papers spread between them. Have to tell you, seeing him there, my own blood about to face judgment, felt like swallowing broken glass. But some cuts need stitches, no matter how much they hurt. The bailiff called us to order, and Judge Martinez settled behind the bench. She had that no-nonsense look of someone who'd seen every trick in the book and wasn't buying any of them. The prosecutor, Kevin Chen, according to the nameplate, stood with 3 thick binders and a laptop. Your Honor, Chen began, we're here regarding case number 2023 CV4891 concerning documented financial fraud and misappropriation. He started laying out exhibits like playing cards. The evidence shows systematic forgery of Walter Ellison's signature on multiple instruments, unauthorized transfer of client retainers, and misuse of personal identifying information for collateral. Remember when I mentioned time moving strange? In that courtroom it seemed to crystallize, each moment sharp and brittle as icicles. The judge studied every document, her reading glasses perched low on her nose. My son kept his eyes fixed on the floor tiles, counting them maybe, or wishing them to open up and swallow him whole. 2 questions, Mr. Chen. Judge Martinez tapped her pen. First, what's the total amount diverted through these transactions? $1.8 million, Your Honor, tracked through 3 separate accounts. She nodded slowly. And second, do you have direct evidence linking the defendant to the account authorizations? Yes, Your Honor. Chen pulled up an email chain on the projector. These communications sent from the defendant's verified account contain specific instructions for each transfer. My son's attorney, some downtown hotshot who probably charged by the breath, seemed to deflate right there at the bench. He knew what was coming. We all did. Given the clear pattern of financial misconduct, Judge Martinez said, this court grants the motion to freeze all accounts pending trial. Mr. Ellison, Jr., you are restricted from accessing or transferring any assets until this matter is resolved. She signed the order with quick, decisive strokes. We'll reconvene for preliminary hearings next Tuesday at 10. A camera clicked somewhere behind me, probably that reporter from the business section who'd been hanging around. I kept my eyes down as I walked out, focusing on the worn concrete steps. Some victories don't need witnesses. In my truck, I pulled out my phone and checked the date. October 12th. The mortgage payment that had been haunting me was due November 15th, with the court order stopping the bleeding from my accounts and James helping restore my pension access. I could actually breathe again. The numbers finally added up to something other than disaster. I turned the key and headed north, toward the lake where I'd built my first custom home 40 years ago. The roads got narrower, the trees thicker, until I spotted the old cinderblock workshop with its for sale sign out front. It wasn't much, maybe 800 square feet plus a storage lean-to, but it had good bones, the kind of place where honest work still meant something. Sarah Chen, the realtor, was waiting by the gate. She had her mother's practical handshake and her father's sharp eye for detail. I'd worked with both of them back in the day. Ready to take a look inside, Mr. Ellison? She unlocked the padlock with a practiced twist. I nodded, breathing in air that smelled like pine sap and possibility. Lead the way. Sarah pushed the door open, and 40 years of workshop memories hit me like a familiar handshake. You know that smell. Damp wood mixing with machine oil, the kind that seeps into concrete over decades. It was all there, along with dust motes dancing in the streams of morning light. Previous owner was a furniture maker, Sarah said, flipping switches, kept the place up until his arthritis got too bad. I ran my hand along a sturdy workbench bolted to the east wall. The wood was scarred, but solid, the way experience should look. Wiring updated recently? Full electrical renovation 3 years ago. 200 amp service, plenty for whatever tools you're planning. She pulled out a folder. Got the inspection reports right here. But I was already studying the light. See, in a workshop, natural light isn't just about saving on electricity. It's about seeing grain patterns true, about catching flaws before they become problems. The north wall, with its row of high windows, was perfect for drafting tables. That clean, constant light would make blueprint details pop. Mind if I take some measurements? I pulled out my old tape measure, the one with my initials scratched near the clip. Take your time. Sarah settled into a chair by the door, tapping notes into her phone. I paced off dimensions, jotting numbers in my notebook. The main space ran 40 by 20, with that lean-to adding another 12 feet depth on the south side. Ceiling peaked at 14 feet, enough height to store lumber vertically if I installed racks. Every step echoed with possibility. Property taxes? I asked, though I'd already researched county records. She handed me a printout. $312 annually. Previous owner got it grandfathered under agricultural rates since it sits on old farmland. The numbers looked solid. Clear title no. Liens, utilities already activated. Sometimes the right path feels like it's been waiting for you to find it. I pulled out my phone and stepped outside. The boss, James, answered on the second ring. How's it look? He asked. Like it was built for what I need. I watched a chickadee land on the gatepost. Wanted you to know I'm moving forward. And James, thank you for everything. You built half this town's custom homes, Walt. Letting your son destroy that legacy wasn't an option. He paused. Get your shop set up. Some of our older clients have been asking about you. Back inside, Sarah had the purchase agreement ready. Simple terms, cash offer, contingent on deed recording by Friday. I signed where she pointed, wrote a check for earnest money, and felt something settle in my chest, like a loose board finally finding its proper place. I'll file this afternoon, she said, tucking the papers into her briefcase. Keys at closing? Perfect. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the 2 key rings she'd left, brass for the gate, steel for the padlock. Next to them, I'd stacked the forms for transferring utilities into my name. Simple paperwork, really, but it felt like drawing up plans for a new foundation. The calendar on my wall had Friday deed pickup circled in red. I set my alarm for 6, had to beat morning traffic to the county office. For the first time in months, my breathing fell into that easy rhythm that comes with knowing exactly where you're headed. Ever notice how a workshop smells different in your memory than in person? But both versions tell the truth. That old oil and wood scent I caught today was real enough, but so was the fresh-cut cedar I remembered from decades ago. Maybe that's what moving forward means. Carrying the best of what was into what could be. I switched off the kitchen light and headed to bed, leaving those keys right where they were. Some symbols don't need to be moved to do their job. Friday morning hit different. You know that feeling when you're about to pour a foundation, and the forms are set just right. That's how I felt pulling into the county office parking lot at 7:15, early enough to grab the first spot near the door. The security guard, Mike according to his badge, nodded as I passed through the metal detector. Early bird, huh? Some papers are worth waking up for. My voice carried more energy than it had in months. The recordings desk was empty, except for a young clerk sorting mail. She looked up as I approached. "Can I help you?" "Deed pickup for Walter Ellison." I slid my ID across the counter. "Should have been recorded yesterday afternoon." Her fingers tapped across the keyboard. "Yes, here it is. Let me pull that for you." She disappeared into a back room and returned with a manila envelope. "Just need your signature here. And here." The raised seal caught the fluorescent light as she handed me the document. "Official. Final. Mine. Remember that first house you bought? How the deed felt both heavier and lighter than you expected? This one had that same weight, but it carried something else too. A fresh start earned the hard way. I didn't linger in the parking lot. The lake was calling and I had a date with a workshop door that needed opening. The morning traffic parted easily, like it knew to stay out of my way. The gravel crunched under my truck tires as I pulled up to the gate. My hands didn't shake at all when I fitted the brass key into the lock. Funny how some moments steady you instead of making you nervous. You ever notice how a place feels different once it's yours? The 12 steps from gate to workshop door felt like walking through my own history. Each footfall stirred up memories of other job sites, other victories. The steel key turned smooth in the padlock. The door hinges creaked. Not a complaint, mind you, just announcing a change in ownership. Morning light spilled across the concrete floor, drawing long shadows from the support posts. I'd brought a broom. Yesterday left it leaning in the corner. 15 minutes of sweeping had the main workbench clear and ready. From my truck, I retrieved the simple frame I'd picked up last night. Nothing fancy, just clean lines and clear glass. The deed settled into it perfect, that raised seal prominent against the white paper. I centered it on the bench, ran my hand along the wood grain beside it. 75 years of working with timber teaches you to read stories in grain patterns. This bench had some tales to tell, and now it was holding the first page of my next chapter. My phone felt solid in my hand as I framed the shot. Workbench, deed, and keys arranged just so in that honest morning light. No fancy filters needed. Truth looks better unadorned. I sent it to James with no caption. Some pictures speak clear enough on their own. Standing there, I couldn't help but think about my son. Word was, he'd been dodging calls from his country club buddies since the board meeting. Amazing how fast a social circle shrinks when the money dries up. Those seized accounts must have felt like concrete shoes, dragging him down to where he'd tried to sink me. But you know what? I didn't feel the victory I'd expected. When you spend decades building something, a reputation, a legacy, a family, watching any part of it crumble just leaves dust in your mouth, even if justice demanded the demolition. The workshop air held that perfect mix of old wood and new possibilities. I stepped into the doorway, letting the sun warm my shoulder. Light cut across those floorboards like pencil lines on fresh blueprint paper, straight, clean, ready for whatever plans came next. My eyes drifted back to the workbench, where the keys rested beside that framed deed. The moment felt like it needed words. Something to seal it proper, like you'd seal a fresh-cut board. Respect is earned, not inherited. I said it clear and quiet, letting the workshop walls hear their first truth from their new owner. Those words hung in the air, solid as cedar heartwood, and I knew they'd hold.